Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is A.Zainuddin. I'm from Degree class, the first semester of State Islamic Institute of Palopo. First of all, I say thanks to Allah who has given us a good health and long life so that we can present in this opportunity without any trouble and any obstacle. Secondly, our salam and salawat always be given to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has guided us from the darkness into the brightness and from the stupidity era into the cleverness era. Well, today I would like to talk about my senior's thesis, which the title is Improving Students' Vocabulary at the second by Spidergram at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo. And today my talk will be in three parts. The first is introduction, and then the review of the literature, and finally the research method. So now let's look at the first chapter. The background. Researcher believes that by spidergram, the students will be able to improve their vocabulary and it can make the students enjoy and eager to learning in the class. It is supported by other researchers before, A.Zainuddin, Jannatun Naima, and Syahrir. The problem of this thesis are, first, vocabulary is not a simple matter because learning thousands of words and it can make the student bored. The second is, students worry to talk each other because they are lack of vocabulary and afraid of making mistakes. The solution of this thesis, the teacher should have good techniques and good preparation in teaching vocabulary. The problem statements. Based on the background, we could know that the problem statements are, first, does the use of spidergram improve students' vocabulary at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo? How is the students' response of using spidergram in learning vocabulary at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo? Relevant to problem statement, the objective of research as follows. To find out the effectiveness, the implementation of spidergram in improving students' vocabulary at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo. To find out the students' responses to spidergram in improving students' vocabulary at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo. The significance of this research were, first, for teacher. This research would like to give information how to teach spidergram in improving students' vocabulary. Second, for students, it can improve students' vocabulary. And the last, for other researcher, it can be a reference for the researcher as. The scope of the research focused on improving students' vocabulary through spidergram at the second grade of SMP PMDS Putra Palopo. The researcher will emphasize the vocabulary on noun, adjective, and verb. Definition of terms. Based on the title above, the writer gave definitions as follows. First, vocabulary is a main component of language or a word that has meaning used by people that must be talked about words such as noun, verb, or adjective in language learning. Spidergram is a diagram with lines and circles that have functioned as a technique for gathering vocabulary and developing topic. Now, I would like to turn to the second chapter or the review of the literature. First, in here I would like to explain the previous study, the concept of spidergram, the concept of vocabulary, and the last is hypothesis. Now let's know the previous study. Atina Yunieta Putri in her thesis The Effect of Using Spidergram on the 8th grade students' vocabulary achievement at SMP Negeri 8 Jember in 2013-2014 academic year, she suggests to use the spidergram to improve students' vocabulary because it has significant effect to increase the students' vocabulary ability. Jannatun Naima in her thesis is enriching students' vocabulary in procedure text through spidergram for junior high school. She concluded that teaching vocabulary through spidergram can enrich student vocabulary in procedure text. Syahrir in his journal Teaching, Speaking, recount text by using spidergram technique for junior high school. He said that the using of spidergram is the alternative technique to teach speaking because it has positive response for students. Now let's know the concept of vocabulary. What is vocabulary? The researcher concludes that vocabulary is a set of meaningful words or lexemes in a language which is known and used by people. So, kinds of vocabulary. There are so many kinds of vocabulary, but I will mention just three of them. The first, based off the characteristics of word. According to Ruth Gerd and Stuart Redman, vocabulary divided into two kinds. The first is active vocabulary and basic vocabulary. Based on the class of words, John Reed in his book Assessing Vocabulary mentioned two kinds of vocabulary. The first is function words and then the content words. Used for communication, there are two kinds of vocabulary used by people for communication. Generally vocabulary and special vocabulary. And then simply teaching vocabulary done for 4 steps. Those are first, introduction. Teacher recognize new vocabulary with clearly and good pronunciation. Use picture or real thing in the learning class. The second is modeling. Teacher gives an example by doing as model. The next is practicing. Teacher trains the students to imitate and practice. The last is applying. Students apply vocabulary in the learning speaking, writing, and etc. Now let's know the concept of spectrogram. What is spectrogram? Spectrogram is a diagram to represent words, ideas, tasks, or other items linked to a central key word or idea. It helps students study skills like taking notes, reading, memorizing, and etc. So let's know the teaching procedure of spectrogram. The first step that we have to do is dividing students based on their number, and then they study alone. The second is giving the students copies of worksheet, one copy for each student, and the sample of worksheet are shown in appendix as the treatment material. The third step is explaining what the students are going to do with they are focused on their spectrogram worksheet and answer questions correlated the topic. The fourth step is asking the student to retell their answer in short talk in front of class. For example, in here, the spectrogram worksheet topic, what do you think about school? And then you have to fill the blank, you have to fill the circle in here and ask the student to fill in the empty circle below with the correlated words that you know. So what is the advantages of spectrogram techniques or the benefits? The first, spectrogram is useful to generate the ideas, visualize, structure, and classify ideas. The second is spectrogram aids students to understand of the information by thinking through connected points. And then spectrogram creates a unique visual image that is easier to recall than a written one. Spectrogram guides students to report without remembering the idea in their head. Spectrogram helps the students to focus on their ideas in reporting activity. There are so many more benefits of spectrogram, but this is some of the benefits. And then the hypothesis. The hypothesis of this research is formulated as follows. First, null hypothesis. There's no significant difference between the result of pre-test and post-test of students. Teaching skills after giving treatment through spectrogram method. The second is alternative hypothesis. There is significant difference between the result of pre-test and post-test of students' teaching skills after giving treatment through spectrogram method. Now, I would like to turn to the last part, or the third chapter, or the research method. Research design. In this research design, we use experimental method. The first that we have to do is pre-test, and then treatment, and then the last is post-test. The location of this research is at SMP PM Des Putra Palopo. The population are the students at SMP PM Des Putra Palopo. The technique of choosing sample of this research was random sampling technique. Therefore, there were 20 students as sample from the second grade. There are two instruments of this research. The first is vocabulary test, divided into two tests, pre-test and post-test, and then the last is questionnaire. Procedure of collecting data, we do 4 steps. The first is giving pre-test and then giving treatment, giving post-test, the last questionnaire. Technique of data analysis. The first is analyzing the student score in pre-test and post-test. The second is classifying the students' score on the 6 components. And the last is analyzing the data using SPSS version 2. So I think that's all my explanation today. I hope you understand. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.